Hoodoo culture in the coastal Carolinas and Georgia was totally new to me. So I started looking around, asking different people about this, and of course, a lot of people. The response is kind of like, Hoodoo doesn't exist and it's bad. It's like, well, what is it,
Keep watching to learn more. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring American Hoodoo practice. My guest is Dr. Paul J. Leslie, who is a professor of psychology at Aiken College in Aiken, South Carolina, where he has a private psychotherapy practice. He is the author of Low Country Shamanism, an exploration of the magical and healing practices of coastal Carolina and Georgia. He is also the author of several books on psychotherapy, including The Art of Creating a Magical Session and Shadows in the Session, the Presence of the Anomalous in Psychotherapy. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Yes.
And your exploration of the Hoodoo practices, sometimes called conjure or conjuring, or the practice of root doctors in the American Southeast is really fascinating. And maybe a good beginning of this exploration is to share with our viewers the distinction between hoodoo and voodoo.
Okay. Hoodoo, at least the way it's practiced in the area that I'm from, is as the title of my book talks about, is a shamanic, magical, and healing practice. It's not really a religion, whereas voodoo has a lot of those same qualities, but there's a religious connection there. And a lot of it is just due to the powers that were in charge of the unfortunate slaves brought to the country. Where I'm from in the coastal Carolinas and Georgia, those groups of people, the slave owners and the culture, were predominantly Protestant. So when people were brought over, they were kind of forced to adopt Protestant beliefs. Whereas a lot of the French who owned slaves in Haiti and places like that were coming from a Catholic background. So what the slaves were able to do was to hide a little more of the religious beliefs in the different spirits in the form of Catholic saints, and so they were able to hold on to more of the religious component of the beliefs they have. So I'll kind of define hoodoo as a pragmatic way of helping and healing, as opposed to helping and healing from a religious perspective.
Now, I could be wrong about this, but I'm also under the impression that the hoodoo culture is derivative quite a bit from the Gullah people of Africa. It came from Angola, whereas I think voodoo, like candomblé or umbanda, is more derivative of the Yoruba traditions from Africa.
There's a lot of that, and at the same time, there's always a blending
Yeah.
Because, with the slaves coming in from different areas, coming into different ports, one of the main ports on the East Coast was Charleston, South Carolina, where it's a couple hours from where I live. And a lot of the West Central Africa slaves brought in kind of came in there. But then over time, we do have a mingling of different regions and perspectives. But a lot of what I found in my research is that there's some common threads that are more alike than dissimilar.
Now, you have engaged in an exploration of the hoodoo practices largely as a psychotherapist.
Right. And I want to be clear for those watching. I'm not somebody who practices hoodoo. What I am is more of a researcher, because I found that this practice is so prevalent, where I am kind of hidden but prevalent. I needed to understand where this was coming from. When I first moved to South Carolina, I remember I was in a supervision group, clinical supervision, where everyone would share cases that they were concerned about or needing feedback. And in this one case, there was a therapist who said that she had a man who was suffering from what we would clinically call panic attacks, along with a generalized anxiety disorder. So he's always anxious. And he told her that he felt the problem was that someone had put the root on him. And they're just talking about that. And I never heard that. So I was like, well, hold on. What does that mean? Somebody put the root. And she said, well, it's kind of like witchcraft. A root is a curse. And I didn't quite understand that. And said, well, there are these groups of people who believe in this hoodoo, conjure, and they believe that when they have mental health or physical problems, there's a big possibility that someone has put this curse on them. And she was trying to help this guy through the framework of traditional therapy, was getting nowhere. And so the only advice I had is like, well, if his belief is so entrenched in this, you might want to find somebody who shares a similar belief and can remove the root. But it just got my mind going. Where does this come from? And, I'd never really heard of it. I heard of voodoo, and I instantly go to, New Orleans, Louisiana. But to think that there was all this hoodoo culture in the coastal Carolinas and Georgia was totally new to me. So I started looking around, asking different people about, this. And of course, a lot of people, the response is kind of like, hoodoo doesn't exist and it's bad. It's like, well, what is it, So I started talking to different people who led me to different people. And indeed, there is a strong belief in kind of African-centric spirituality, which is the base, along with these Protestant beliefs. But because it has been so ridiculed over the years, a lot of people keep those beliefs to themselves. So it is a hidden culture in which if you feel there's something wrong with you and your medical doctor can't help you, you will go to someone that we call a root doctor. Now, the term root came out of when the slaves were having medical issues. Unless it was something very serious, the overseer rarely called the doctor because, that's money. So if a slave's going to die, they may call the doctor. So for common ailments and things like that, they would kind of have to heal themselves. And generally, there's one or more people in the slave community who are good at herbal medicines and other healing practices. So plants and roots they would get to try and use for medicinal purposes. So that term, the root doctor, applied not just to an herbalist, but also somebody who was a magician who could perform magic and do certain spells to protect you, to give you hope. I think the context here is so important. If you were a slave before the Civil War, there's no hope, really. You need something to give you hope. And they would utilize these root doctors in their slave community as a way to feel a sense of control in a situation where they had no control. And I felt this has continued throughout our history, and I think it's a very important thing to pay attention to rather than to just, oh, it's a bunch of superstitious nonsense. And let's just pretend it is superstition. It's still a part of a vibrant culture that had to be so resilient in times that you and I can never imagine having gone through. So that really kind of led me to investigate more. And is this something that therapists in their communities where this might need to be more aware of?
So in your investigations, I gather you went to the library, you looked at the anthropological literature.
Yeah, I started there, but then I started trying to find people. And this was the tricky part. The true root doctors generally, not all of them, but generally don't put out a shingle. And I had to do a lot of investigation, knock on doors where maybe the reception was polite but a little cool. There's places off the coast of Carolina, we call it, the Sea Islands, where as you mentioned, the Gullah. The Gullah are the descendants of African slaves who have had their own culture, a beautiful culture that's kind of a blending of African influences along with, the influences they learned here in the United States. And they kind of have their own language, a lot of fascinating ways of seeing the world. Now, here comes this white guy. And I'm knocking on doors. And of course, I've got to get a cool response. And I wasn't really open, I guess, to it mentally. I was kind of detached from it, more of like an anthropological scientist to investigate. Mm-hmm. And one day it occurred to me, I need to have somebody to give me better introductions who is involved. And I need to be more open to it and not be so skeptical. Just kind of go in and why is this important? I want to learn from you and just, I don't want to learn take what you know and ridicule it. I really need to coming with a degree of humility. And then once that happened, it's funny, all the doors started opening. I had a colleague who told me that not only was her grandfather a root doctor, but her uncle used to date the daughter of the most famous root doctor in the Southeast. And there's all this family connection. So doors started opening. And I wonder sometimes if maybe my over enthusiasm to, be objective in all of the kind of approach it in a scholarly manner, and my lack of openness was the biggest barrier. So that, and then it just, people welcomed me in, and it was wonderful.
Well, you mentioned the most famous root doctor of the Southeast, Doc Buzzard.
Right.
And there's a lot of folklore around this person. I think for the benefit of our viewers, if we can talk about the life of Doc Buzzard, it'll give them a real sense of what this hoodoo community is about.
Right. Yeah, Dr. Buzzard, his real name, and by the way, there are multiple people who have taken on that name. And the reason we're saying Doc Buzzard, there are since they're root doctors, they use the doctor title, but you'll notice a lot of times they will choose animals as kind of, and to me it's very similar to some of the Native American where they embody certain animal spirits and those things, which is kind of a shamanic tie-in there. But Dr. Buzzard's real name was Stephanie Robinson, and he lived in the early part of the 20th century. He was the most famous root doctor in the way that people who follow voodoo, Marie Laveau is the most famous voodoo practitioner, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Well, Dr. Buzzard was so famous that people from all over the country would come see him or would mail him money to ask him to take off curses or put on curses or just help me find the love of my life, help me find more money. And so they would send him money. He became very, very wealthy. And I want to kind of put into, for a lot of people, Dr. Buzzard was a very terrifying figure, but he also did a lot of really good things. I mean, for example, he was a philanthropist. That's something that a lot of people don't talk about. He built several churches on St. Helena Island, which is one of the islands off of Beaufort, South Carolina, and he helped a lot of people. But he would also show up in the courtroom when somebody had hired him to maybe go protect their son who was, having to stand trial for robbery or something. And he would come in with these round blue glasses and just have this appearance of having a magical effect on the trial, and would try to sway the jury through magic and these kind of things. So for some of the population, he was a bit of a pariah, but to others, he was not only somebody that was there to help people heal, but to save people from racial injustice and to help people basically live happier lives. So you get conflicting stories. If we're going to talk about Dr. Buzzard, I have to talk about the battle between Dr. Buzzard and Sheriff McTeer. Now, McTeer was the youngest sheriff, I think, in South Carolina history, and probably been the sheriff of Beaufort County for many years. And McTeer grew up all around this culture of the Gullah. And so he figured out that if he was going to be an effective sheriff, he had to enter the world of these people. So he became pretty well versed in hoodoo, and even gave the impression that he was a hoodoo doctor, a root doctor. Well, this led him in opposition to Dr. Buzzard, and there is a much folklore about the psychic battles between Sheriff McTeer and Dr. Buzzard. And they went back and forth and back. I remember one story was McTeer came in one day to find his desk had powdered all over it, and basically somehow Dr. Buzzard had gotten into his office and had done some ritual there to try and change the course of some investigation. Eventually the psychic battles ended when unfortunately Dr. Buzzard's son was killed in a car wreck, and he attributed that to McTeer's magic. So he went to see McTeer and said, "Uncle, you win. You've gone hardcore. Let's call it a truce." And the funny thing is, in later life, the two of them actually became friends. And I think they kind of learned from each other, McTeer learning more from Dr. Buzzard. But Dr. Buzzard was a healer, a champion of his people. And in a time in which, there was no internet, telephone only, you didn't see things like this in print, his influence just spread throughout the African-American community throughout the Southeast, even up into New York.
I am assuming he had something like a mail order business.
Yeah, not so much that you would see an ad in the paper. It's just somehow they would find out, his address. Mm-hmm. And it got to the point to where I was told that when he would go to the post office, he'd come out with all these envelopes, and he'd sit in the post office and he'd open an envelope. And if it had a check in it, like someone wrote a personal check, he'd tear it up and throw it in the trash. He only wanted cash, because he didn't want to be tied to, you have a record of everything. So he was doing so well, he's just tearing it, to protect himself. But, the people would write to him all over, come to see him. Relatives of his said there'd be cars from all over the country in the front yard sometimes when they'd come to visit, seeking his help as a spiritual counselor, if you will.
It sort of reminds me of the attention that some of the Filipino psychic surgeons attracted to themselves.
Absolutely, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And even though the root doctors didn't partake in that, a lot of the psychological aspects of that are very similar. Mm-hmm. Right?
And I gather that McTeer eventually had Doc Buzzard arrested for practicing medicine without a license.
Yeah, and it wasn't strictly McTeer. I don't think he was the one who started, but being the sheriff, you've got to do that. Yeah, and they kept trying to go after Dr. Buzzard, and they could never get him. Now, there were other people in that community, a guy, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, Dr. Eagle, who was practicing without a license, which, as a little side note, Dr. Eagle, his common law wife, was Minerva. And if anyone's ever read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Minerva figures prominently in that book. So it's a real person, and she was a root doctor. Some people said she was schizophrenic, but she had a lot of, if we can use the term, mojo. And so she was the common law wife of Dr. Eagle, who had some psychic battle with another guy who wanted to be Minerva's boyfriend. So people like, and there's also Dr. Bug. Now, Dr. Bug was someone who would give a special serum to people who wanted to get out of the draft, because when they take it that morning, when they listen to the heart, it would skip a little bit. And so, well, you're unfit for the military. And then they cracked down on him. Well, Dr. Buzzard, getting back to him, never served any time. And it just kind of went away, and he is his grave now is very few people know where it is, and it's considered a sacred territory, and finding his grave is discouraged. But yeah, there's all these kind of battles, and some of my colleagues see it not just as a battle of beliefs, but there's a clear racial divide during that time, and kind of viewing it a battle between white and black. And so there's all these kind of socioeconomic aspects to it as well.
Well, I found one of the chapters in your book particularly interesting. Doc Coyote, who you visited, was a Caucasian practitioner of Hoodoo, which I presume maybe there's more of that today than there once was, but still quite rare.
Yeah, exactly. I was, because most of the people I talk to and that I profile are African Americans. And then someone said, well, you do need to talk to this guy. And so I did speak with Doc Coyote, who is a cross, when you see him, at least when I did, it was a cross between, I have an image of how a white root doctor is supposed to look. It looked like a cross between Johnny Cash and something from a Quentin Tarantino movie. And a very nice guy, but he's from the South and well-versed in the occult, but was just drawn to what's in his backyard. And I think that's another thing that I found is a lot of people are looking for magic and healing, and we don't sometimes look in our backyard. And he told this wonderful story about to take the mantle up to become a root doctor by visiting the grave of a gentleman named Jim Jordan in North Carolina. And Jim Jordan was a very famous root doctor during the early part of the 20th century, so famous that medical doctors, white medical doctors, if they couldn't get anywhere with a patient, they would send them to Jim Jordan. And yet again, Jim Jordan, another philanthropist, he would pay people's mortgages off. He would, pay people's cars off, help people who were on hard times, and crediting the magic and the healing work he did. So when Doc Coyote went to his grave, he had, I'm going to use my words, maybe a religious experience for him to take on the mantle and move forward being a real, true root doctor.
And as I recall from your description, that grave was also relatively hidden. He had to get permission from the relatives.
Right.
So there was some, you could say, almost initiations to get to the grave. Yeah. But when he got there, he engaged in some form of an attempt to communicate with the spirit.
Right.
Now, I know in many traditions, the graves of saints and holy people are considered special, and this is particularly true amongst the Hoodoo people, that graves are of significance.
Yes, absolutely. When you said he had to go to the family, he said it in such a way, he said, I talked to a relative, and after they lowered the shotgun that they had, who's this person coming on my property, he said it was fine. But that connection, that connection with the grave, the deceased, ancestor worship, ancestor reverence is so important in that culture. And just the act of how to lay out the body after one has died, how the body's buried, certain rituals to keep the spirits from following one home. Sometimes people try to go in and take what they call in the Hoodoo world gopher dust, GOOFER dust, which is basically dirt from the grave of somebody, and hopefully you'll take the magical qualities of that person, with you in the graveyard dust that you can use in your own rituals. Now gufur, what I found is like a kind of a slang taken off kufa, which is an African, I'm not sure which dialect, meaning ghost. So we could say it's like ghost dirt. And so if you wanted somebody, for example, if you wanted to become wealthy, and you found that they're a millionaire, multimillionaire in town had recently died, you would sneak in one night and try to take some of the dirt to use. Maybe you could grab the essence of this person, financial intelligence, somebody who was good in love, or somebody who maybe wasn't good. Maybe you would use that as if you wanted to put a curse on somebody. You might want to take the dirt from that person and use, which is another reason why, as you mentioned, Dr. Buzzard, Jim Jordan, some of these graves, there may be a reason why they're kind of hidden, because everybody's, who's into that may be wanting to take a piece to use that power for themselves, for good and maybe not so good.
Well, I suppose one of the fundamental principles of hoodoo is the belief in spirits, and the belief that the root doctor is not just working with herbs, but is working with the spirits.
Right. And that's why when I was doing this research, I really connected in my mind that what we have here is our own backyard shamans. So I went and I read Eliade's classic text on shamanism, and there's debate now about, how he put all the characteristics of shamans. But I said, okay, for so many years, this has been the kind of the definitive work. So I went through each category that he listed, and I found that the root doctors were in every one of them. Mm-hmm. So you didn't need to go to, if you're in South Carolina or Georgia, you don't need to go to the Southwest to find a shaman. You don't need to go to Tibet to find. They're in our own backyards. Things like, you are interfacing with the spirits, and sometimes the spirits tell you something to tell your client. The whole thing of vision quests, that happens in the Gullah community. There are people, there's a certain type of, like a headband people wear. And when they're walking around with that headband, traditionally it was, okay, it's almost like a little rope. That person's about to go on some quest to commune with nature, with the ancestors, and that. Using the ability to bridge that gap to go into the spirit world to bring back information, or even just for protection purposes. So it fit all these categories. And it unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of been reduced to superstition. But I argue this is a vibrant, real shamanic culture that is so underground that it tends to get forgotten. So all that spiritual interaction. I'll tell you a quick story. When I went to see one of these root doctors, who I met a lot of people that they would talk, but they'd say, "No, I forbid you to print anything about me." And a lot of times I just heard no. Dr. Buzzard's grandson, who is a root doctor outside of Beaufort, was very respectful to tell me no. He didn't want to talk to me about hoodoo because he was scared there could be some kind of repercussion, and it's a long story there. But I went and saw this one root doctor, and he's talking to me. He's just kind of quietly sitting there, and then he says, "Dr. Leslie, the reason you came here is not the reason you came here. I just heard that I'm about to tell you something. And what I'm about to tell you is what you need to hear." And what he was saying is he had been supplied something. To be quite honest, when he starts talking, it's hypnotic. You get, okay, oh my gosh, and I don't even remember what he was telling me. I was so taken back by it. But they go in and out of the spirit world, kind of like it's much like the psychics we see, or proclaimed psychics, where they're talking to you. You go, wait, hold on. Your grandmother just told me that, blah, blah, blah. And they're commonly in and out of the world. But you won't know sometimes that they're doing that unless you have been given an introduction and they feel that it's safe to talk to you. But it is an amazing culture that does spend adequate time in what they perceive as the spirit world and the regular world.
Well, as a parapsychologist, I assume that there's a mixture of folklore, superstition, and authentic psi experiences going on.
I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of, just be blunt, there's a lot of placebo effect going on, certainly. But there's also got to be something a little more than just placebo, even if it is theatrics. Because if it didn't work for people, in this day and age, they'd stop going. We've got medical doctors, we've got psychologists, psychotherapists. Why would you go to the root doctor? Well, if it's cultural, that's one thing. But if this root doctor is not getting you the results you want, you're not going to go back. So there's a perception of efficacy of the practices of the treatment. One of the things, Jeff, I did learn that helped me as a therapist, not to do root work, that I don't do that. But what it really reinforced and I learned is that the interaction you have with a client, psychotherapy client, and the interaction if you're a root doctor with your root client is similar in that you're creating an experience. And the experience sometimes is gentle and connective. Sometimes it's, improvisational, intense, and in their case, sometimes it's frightening. But it's changing the emotional state of the person as they are talking. So it is really profound to me that they don't have the constraints that I think my field does in how they interact. So it taught me to loosen up a little more and maybe go to places that I wouldn't have gone previously, but to really rely on what the client needs. So there is that element of performance, which, it's if you look at it as an art moves us. Art, that's the goal of art, to create a shift in our consciousness, if you will.
Well, as I read your book, I thought there was one quality that stood out in your conversation with Doc Coyote. It's a quality you could find in theater. It's also a quality you find in religion as well. And he said it's not just about reading the lines or going through the ritual. It has to do with your state of mind while you're doing it, the ability to enter into a really profound state of focused intention.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's where artists are in their zone. That's what they're doing. My dear friends, Andy and Bernice Tate, who I also feature in the book, they are artists who are also Hoodoo practitioners. And it's the same, they see it the same way that Doc Coyote does. It's like, where are we putting our mind? And if you're doing a ritual and you're just going through the motions, it's not going to do anything. So the root doctor's job is not only have his or her mind in the right place, the focus, they also want to get their client's mind. It's like, it's got to be this co-creative process, much like good psychotherapy. It's a co-creative. It's not just the therapist doing something to the client. They're creating an outcome together. So when the root doctor creates a root, what in voodoo and some of the other practices called the mojo, which is a little packet of something that you carry with you to protect you or give you luck or those kind of things. It is crucial that when they're creating that, and they have to be focused. I'm creating, not just going through the motions. I have to be sending out this intention. This is this is healing. This is protection. This is for somebody for love. And then to get the client in such a state that I'm passing the intention to the client so that they are going away and it's almost more powerful because we're both in that state. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same thing for me in psychotherapy. If I don't have the emotional state that there's hope and expectancy of change, I can't expect my client to bring that up, because if they had that, they wouldn't be coming to see me. So that intention is, and I think it's across the board, but that's the parallel I found. And yes, that is the most important thing to everyone I talk to. It's having that focus.
Now, one of the most interesting aspects of your work is encountering a lady, Angel Hakim, I believe,
yes,
who came from a family with a long tradition of root doctors who is now being trained as a psychotherapist.
Yes. Angel is actually completing her doctorate in counselor education and supervision and, as you say, being trained. Her father, Walter Barnum Sr., I think, I don't know if it's William or Walter, so I apologize, was a very well-known root doctor in Savannah, Georgia, and everyone called him Prophet. And Angel, I was very honored, she shared a picture with me and allowed me to share it with other people of him. And he had this bushy hair and bushy beard, but she said his hair was red, a little bit of red to it. And he was an imposing figure. And he was, they called him Prophet because he was also involved in church. And he drove this big car around painted like a yellow taxi cab with red religious symbols like crosses and Star of David all over it. So you knew when he went around, there's Prophet. But he would have this presence to where if somebody was giving him a hard time, he'd just look him in the eye and just I will turn you into a dog. And then people were just, thinking he could do that. He had this powerful presence. He also would travel up and down the coast, speaking at churches, doing what we would call mediumship. And Angel told me when she was a little girl, she and her father went to his mentor who lived in Rocky Ford, Georgia, a little town, this old lady, which, if I can say, interesting, the man goes to see a lady as the mentor. That's not uncommon in low country hoodoo because women had so much power spiritually as well as men. So it's not just the male having these positions. And she talks about this lady just glowed all the time and weird phenomena like trees not being put by the wind, but trees would start to bend over like in unison when the lady was out there praying or doing her meditations. And Angel says she always grew up with this psychic ability, and she was born as a lot of people who later are identified as shamans, as the call is over the face when they're born. And she's kind of grew up in that, and for many years did a lot of work. Eventually, I don't think her time in Savannah was as fruitful as it is now, because there's also that religious backlash from the other side of the tracks on these kind of things. But and so she's now trying to combine the best of both worlds with the Western psychotherapy and her training and mediumship in hoodoo. And to me, that's very exciting. And whether I believe in that or not, if that's meeting a need of her clients, we need to, I think, sit back and go, okay, what's happening here? How can we bridge that gap instead of being so kind of a barrier between those two fields?
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked earlier about Sheriff McTeer,
right,
who on the one hand was engaged in a battle with Doc Buzzard, was
right,
trying to bring him to Western justice, American justice. On the other hand, had a reputation himself as a root doctor.
Right.
You have a very interesting story of a healing that was attributed to Sheriff McTeer.
Let me again set the stage. Here we have a young man who has the largest county in South Carolina at that time to oversee, with a very limited amount of resources. The Gullah outnumbered at that time all the Caucasians there. So if you're trying to keep both sides happy, you have to be very clever.
And he spoke the Gullah language.
Yeah, indeed, because he was brought up in that. So he figured, what's working here? How can I utilize the culture? So he would do things like he would see that, like Dr. Buzzard wore these blue round sunglasses. kind of like the John Lennon glasses, but that's bright blue. And blue has a significant spiritual meaning in African culture, West Central African culture. Blue meaning spirits can't go across water. So it's a protection thing. So when he would bring someone in to question them, if they were getting nowhere and this person was gullah or had a belief in such things, Matir would walk in, sit down, put on the blue glasses, and just start to try and talk to, and the person then would get into this kind of state, as in he's got, it's like talking to Dr. Buzzard, and was able to get more information out of him. I don't know if it's this particular story or not, but there's many of these where someone had thought that they'd had a root put on them, and maybe they had. And so what Matir did is he had basically to apprehend someone who had put in a root under and again, I want to be clear, root is like a little mojo bag. They snuck in and put a root underneath the house, and as a way to keep somebody feeling, having a sense of, I think it was, and I might be remembering this wrong, but some kind of paralysis or some kind of issue. And so they believed the root had been put under them, under the house. And so he just sent one of his guys out, snuck it under there. And then he goes out in this big, with his glasses, makes a big production, goes under the house and finds the root. And aha, here it is. And he takes it, and the person magically recovers. Now, certainly placebo effect, but at the same time having the foresight to, rather than, listen, this is nonsense. You can't have all these problems. This is just a packet of, he utilized what their beliefs were to actually help them. At the end of his term as sheriff, the Gullah community even said that they viewed him as a friend, because many of them saw that in some ways he was trying to help, but other ways he was a product
the
of
use
time.
of subterfuge like that, in my understanding, is common worldwide amongst shamanistic practitioners.
I absolutely agree with that. I've read a lot of, and a friend of yours, Stan Krippner's work. And I'd encourage anybody to read anything by Krippner about shamanism. It is almost like there is a trick needed to get that intention set. So if I can trick you initially really quick to believe something, that opens or lowers the defenses. It gives an opening to maybe I can do other things. So, for example, if a root doctor is really good at cold reading, he or she may not initially know something spiritual about you, but if they can go in and say, I can tell your grandfather did such and such, and it connects, it opens them up, so then they can create that relationship where if there is a spiritual component, they can pull that intention in. But if the person's blocked off and not open, sometimes there's that trickery opens them up to the process.
If someone enters into a state of awe or reverence or devotion, they may be more open to what, as a parapsychologist, we call authentic psi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and that's another thing I pulled to psychotherapy. If we can't initiate a feeling of openness and awe in our clients, or just the basic idea that you can help, therapy is very limited. And I think that's the root doctors, or at least the ones that I've researched and interacted with, they're very good at making you feel. Even if and I was skeptical, but even if you're not a believer, they have that quality, almost that charismatic presentation that opens the gateway for later work.
Well, Paul, I think your work is very significant in the fact that you're looking at the intersection of real magic and psychotherapy. And your exploration of the Hoodoo tradition is one step in that direction. I'm delighted that you're here with me now in Albuquerque, because we're going to do a few more interviews talking about some of your other explorations as a psychotherapist, working with what we'll call real magic.
Yeah,
Paul. So thank you so much for being with me.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.